Hey Drew, Selena, Sean, anybody else watching, because this is going to be open to the public. I'm trying to get a little more used to working the camera and being on camera, so I'm going to read you a couple of things and hope I don't make a complete fool of myself. So, first thing I'm going to read is a poem, Escape My Cage. Kyoto Loves Lambos X3 requested it. And then I'm going to read 2 Kittens for Drew, because he likes the story. So, just let me pull it up, and I'll read it to you. I probably won't be looking at the screen too much. There we go. Escape my cage. I am like a bird held captive. As long as the gate to my cage stays shut, I will continue to live behind bars. However, if anyone is foolish enough to open my cage, I will make an escape towards the open sky. And like an escaped bird, I will not stop to see if my leaving upsets the one who held me captive. I will not risk my freedom to glance backwards at my owner's sobbing form, because the sight of their tears will make me feel guilty. If I see the tears of any creature, I will feel the need to slow my escape so that I may comfort whomever is in distress. Then the person who I made the mistake of showing kindness will catch me as if they have the right to own me, and I will find myself in a cage once again. So I will avert my eyes from their sorrow and attempt to ignore their cries of despair, as I make a move to be what I am meant to be. I will be my own master, and I will follow my own decisions. Only then will I be able to sing. Only then will I be happy. Didn't mess up too much there. We can deal with that, right? It's not too bad. And then let's get two kittens pulled up for you. Let's see if I'll cry reading this to you. Because it made other people cry reading it, and I cried writing it. There it is. It's very far into my page. Two kittens. Once there was a kitten. This kitten had white fur and lived at the pound in a tiny cage all by himself. He was never allowed outside his cage because he was very sick and could make the other kittens sick. He spent virtually every day of his life watching as the other cats were allowed to play and socialize with each other. At the other end of the building, there was another kitten in that same situation. That kitten had solid black fur and was kept away from the other cats because people thought he was too aggressive to be social. They feared he may harm the other cats. Neither of these kittens were up for adoption because the people who ran the pound believed no one would want them, because they weren't normal animals by their standards. Then one day, a young woman came to the pound looking to adopt a cat. Both the caged kittens watched from where they were as the woman played with all of the adoptable cats, and as usual they felt their hearts sink when they remembered that they'd never be held as affectionately as the woman seemed to be holding the cat she played with. However, after the woman had pet and looked at all of the other cats she had been brought to her, she looked to the people of the pound and frowned at them. All of these cats are lovely, but none of them speak to me the way I'd like them to. Do you have any other cats? Any that you refuse to show me for some reason? She asked calmly, staring straight into the eyes of whichever person stood closest to her. For a few minutes, the people of the pound stood there and tried to convince her to adopt one of the cats she had already seen. But no matter how many times they tried to convince her, she refused. She always ended her refusal statements with, "Let me see the ones you hide." After a few hours of persistence, the woman finally managed to convince the people of the pound to bring her whichever cats they'd kept hidden. They brought her the cages of the 2 kittens they'd kept isolated, but they refused to let them out so that she could pet them. When she asked why, the people in charge said, "That white one is sick and dying. We don't need him getting anyone else sick. The only reason we haven't put him down is because we're not allowed to euthanize animals. That black one is too aggressive for people. He bites and scratches, and just plain isn't fit to be a pet," they said calmly, but with distaste. In response to what they told her, the woman peered directly into the cages of the kittens and smiled at them. The white one might be sick, but that's no reason to lock him up and never touch him. That black one just needs someone to bring out his soft side, she said with a smile before she turned to face the people in charge of the pound. I'll take both of them, she said happily, earning some hateful glances from the people in charge of the pound. Reluctant as they were, the people in charge of the pound allowed the woman to purchase the 2 cats. She paid for them and saw to it that both of them were vaccinated despite advice against giving the white kitten medicine because he was already dying. She refused to not immunize the white kitten, and when they attempted to refuse her demand, she threatened to report them for violation of listed rules. The rules stating that they must immunize any animal being adopted, no matter what condition they were in. To ensure that they did as was asked, she made them show her the medicine given to the kittens as she watched as she gave it to them. She quickly noted that the black kitten was indeed highly aggressive towards people, though she had a feeling that his resentment for constant contact came from more than what people were willing to admit. The white kitten, on the other hand, trembled beneath the hands of those who treated it. That was when she first noticed the scars hidden beneath his unkempt white fur. She didn't have to ask to know that both of the kittens had been badly mistreated. Then, after everything was said and done, she took the kittens out to her car and put them in the back seat. As much as she hated it, she had to keep them in the cages until she was home, but after that, she'd never put them back behind bars again. She quickly drove them home, but made sure to stop and pick up a few different items of cat food to ensure she was able to find something they would like. She even picked up some cat treats, another collar, seeing as she only had one at home, and some powdered milk and bottles. Before she'd gone to buy everything, she paid someone at the store to watch her kittens, because she didn't want them to be alone. Once she had everything, she drove home, and brought her kittens inside and set their cages in the middle of the living room, and she opened them before backing away so that they could come out when they were ready. Neither of the kittens were willing to leave their cages at first, because they were afraid of what might happen. Neither of them were used to being out in the open, and the only memories they'd had of being outside cages involved pain and sorrow. She understood why they were so hesitant, so she left them alone and gave them some space. She left the room and walked back out to the car to bring everything she had bought inside, and after putting it all in the pantry, she decided to try making them some milk. She quickly prepared two small saucers of milk, and checked the temperatures to make sure that it wasn't too hot. Then she returned to her living room and gently placed a bowl just outside the cages. With luck, the treat would coax them out into the open so that she could get rid of the cages. If not, she would feed them like that as many times as she needed for them to warm up to the outside world. As she expected, the kittens needed a few days to work up the courage to step outside their cages. When they did, she wasn't surprised that they decided to hide under the couch. But at least she could get out of the cages. Naturally, she wound up feeding them at a distance for a while, but she still managed to figure out what brands of cat food they liked. They preferred wet food, and they enjoyed most flavors that she gave them, probably because it was better than what they'd been given back at the pound. This became routine for 3 weeks, until one day after the 3rd week ended, the little white kitten decided to step out from under the couch to look at his owner. When he stepped out, she didn't try to pick him up, nor did she make a move to touch him. She just watched him as he stepped out from under the couch, and crept over to sniff her leg. Then she watched him run back under the couch, and she laughed quietly to herself. At least they were warming up to her. For the next few days after that, it was all a matter of her giving the kittens a chance to inspect her without bothering them. For the most part, nothing interesting happened. The kittens took turns creeping out from under the couch to inspect her. The black kitten climbed atop the couch once to sniff her hand, and the white one climbed inside her shoe after she took it off to see if it was comfortable. Then there came the day she had been waiting for. The white kitten climbed on top of the couch and curled up at her side. That was when she first tried to touch him, and even though he flinched when she laid her hand on his back, he didn't try to run away. She didn't do much aside from that. She just put her hand on his back and stayed still. After that, her relationship with the kittens began to grow. They began to climb atop the couch more frequently, and the black kitten was the first to climb into her lap and give her a chance to really pet him. She must have crossed the line when she scratched him under his chin, because that was when he bit her. It wasn't a very bad bite, but he made her bleed a little bit. She didn't get mad at him, though. He was only trying to intense step whenever she touched him, and since he bore so many scars, she wanted to make sure she didn't accidentally hurt him. In the end, she was just glad he was willing to let her pet him. As more time passed, she and the kittens began deepening their bond with one another. They eventually became comfortable enough with her to let her pick them up, and that was when she took the opportunity to groom them. That was when she caught the first glimpse of how cruel people had been to the white kitten, which she simply called Kit to prevent herself from giving him a stereotypical name like Snowball or Fluffy. The poor kitten was covered from head to toe in scars, and was actually missing an eye. There was a large, nasty scar running around the missing eye, so someone had done something very cruel to the poor thing. With that, she completely understood why he had been so frightened of her, but now that she knew, she was glad that she let her hold him and pet him. The black kitten had a few scars here and there on his body, but she could tell by his behavior that the damage to him was a little more emotional than it was physical. She decided to name the black kitten Cubby due to his cute appearance but dangerous attitude. When she had them both cleaned and trimmed, she put on their collars and began to show them around the rest of the house. She showed them where she slept, where she ate, her bathroom, and so forth, and so on. Eventually, she brought them back to the living room and she set them on the couch. She immediately went to go to the kitchen to get something for them to eat, but to her surprise, she felt tiny claws dig into her back when she turned around. A split second later, she heard something fall on the floor. She quickly turned to find that Kit had tried to cling to her when she turned to walk away, and that brought a few small tears to her eyes. He didn't want her to leave him alone. Without another thought, she scooped Kit into her arms, and she picked up Cubby to put him on her shoulder, and she carried them into the kitchen to get them their food, and she snagged something from the fridge so that they could all eat together. From there, her relationship with the kittens only grew. Days passed, becoming weeks, and weeks slowly turned to months. She would stay up late at night playing with her kittens. They followed her around the house when she was home, and whenever she cooked, they either sat on her counter watching her, or they clung to her shoulders and sleeves. She even took to wearing a large sweatshirt with giant pockets so that she could carry them around without having to worry about dropping them. At night when she went to bed, they would curl up next to each other beside her. Most of the time they slept by her chest or head. She would pet them until the comforting sounds of their purrs lured her into a peaceful sleep. Whenever she left to tend to business outside of home, she would come back to find them running up to her to demand a good half hour of nonstop cuddling. Those months she spent with them easily became the happiest years of her life. Before she knew it, a year had passed. Kit and Cubby had grown into a fine-looking pair of adult cats. They doubled in size, and they'd mellowed out. Kit no longer feared being touched, though he was hesitant around strangers. Cubby had gone from being aggressive and unwanted touches to putting up with forced snuggles to the forced snuggles of toddlers who came over from time to time. Times couldn't be happier for the little family of three, and of course, that was when tragedy struck. One day, only a few weeks after the 1-year anniversary of her adopting her beloved cats from the pound, Kit collapsed in the middle of the living room and never stood back up. The illness that he'd been carrying since adoption finally caught up with him, and it struck him down so suddenly that his owner was never able to catch on to the slightest hint of him being sick. There was no change in behavior or appetite. He went from being perfectly healthy to dead in the blink of an eye. She spent days crying after she realized that Kit had passed away so suddenly. But through her tears, she managed to take her beloved cat to the local crematorium to have him cremated. She brought Cubby with her also, because she didn't want him to leave at home all by himself, and she feared coming home to find him dead if she didn't keep him by her side. She had to have him cremated. She simply couldn't bear the idea of burying him, and having him become food to the worms in her yard. When she arrived at the crematorium, she did everything that was required of her to have her pet cremated. When the people took Kit from her arms and carried him away, she had to leave the building to prevent from wailing it like an infant. She held Cubby tightly in her arms and sobbed into his black fur, and the cat clung to her as if expecting her to vanish before his very eyes. She knew that he could sense what was going on, and that he knew what had happened. He was hurting just as badly as she was on the inside. And so they comforted each other, until the time came for her to retrieve the remains of Kit. His ashes were contained in a small jar decorated with roses and a few lovely colors. She had the people glue the lid shut so that nothing could ever happen to what remained of her beloved Kit. Afterwards, she took Kit's ashes and Cubby, and she drove home. She prepared a nice spot by the window, where Kit had liked to sit and wait for her whenever she left, and she set his ashes there. She put his favorite pillow on the windowsill, and arranged all of Kit's toys and grooming utensils around it. As for his collar, which was adorned with his name tag and a small bell, she took to wearing it as a bracelet in memory of him. She wore it wherever she went, only taking it off when it was absolutely necessary. After that, Cubby's behavior changed. He began sleeping beside Kit's ashes on the windowsill at night. He would bring small pieces of food to the window and leave them on the pillows if he was waiting for Kit to climb out of the sealed jar and eat with him. The woman took to sleeping on the floor beneath the windowsill because she no longer found her bed appealing. As time passed, she gradually began to notice that Cubby's behavior had taken on a dangerous change. The black cat slowly stopped eating, he rarely drank, and he only left the windowsill to take care of personal needs. She tried everything she could to stop Cubby's slow descent into depression, but in the end she could not bring herself to force-feed him. In time, she lost him as well. She stayed beside him as he died. Her head had been resting on his side as she pet him, as he passed away, she heard the steady rhythm of his heartbeat slow, until at last it stopped. After that, she did the same with Cubby as she had done with Kit. She brought him to the crematorium, and did what needed to be done so that she could have him cremated. Because she had no living thing to hold on to while she went outside to weep, she brought Kit's ashes with her and pressed her face against the glass of the jar as she sobbed. That had been the first time she'd moved the white cat's ashes since its passing. When she was given Cubby's ashes, the jar his remains had been put in was pure silver, with a golden top, and that top was glued to the jar to prevent his ashes from ever being disturbed. When she returned home, she did the same as she had done with Kit. A new pillow was placed beside a windowsill, and Cubby's ashes were set carefully atop it. She arranged for all of his toys and grooming items around it, and she put Cubby's collar on her other arm as a second bracelet. Neither of the collars were taken off unless she absolutely had to. With that, the woman decided to go about her life without ever allowing herself to bond with anything again, for fear of the pain that racked her come the deaths of her beloved cats. However, the world is a mysterious place, and every now and again, the world will grant a miracle to someone of worth. She, who had saved the lives of 2 kittens and given them a happy life despite knowledge of the consequences, had been the one chosen for a mysterious act of kindness from fate. A few years after the deaths of her beloved cats, she woke beneath the windowsill as she had done every day since their passing, and she slowly rose to go about her usual routine. However, on this particular morning, when she woke and sat up to pay her respect to her deceased cats, she found that their ashes were gone. The jars were no longer on the pillows, but everything else remained in place. In a panic, she began to search the house furiously in desperation to find the ashes. But before her search could have a decent start to it, there was a knock on her door. Though she did not want to, she made her way over to the door and slowly opened it, and when she did, she was greeted by the sight of 2 boys. One of these boys had solid dark brown or possibly black hair, but thanks to the lighting she couldn't tell what color his eyes were. The other boy, who happened to be taller than his dark-haired friend, had pure white hair and breathtakingly beautiful purple eyes. Or eye, to be specific. One of his eyes were closed and had a scar running through it. From what she could see, the white-haired boy had a lot of scars visible on the skin he'd left unhidden. He had actually gone out of the way to keep most of his skin covered despite the temperature. Confused, she stared at the 2 strange boys who smiled at her warmly as if they were looking at an old friend. She locked eyes with the white-haired boy on impulse. Without understanding why, tears began to stream down her face as she looked at the white-haired boy, who smiled softly at her and extended his arms to grasp her shoulders. He pushed her inside gently, so that he and his friend could enter the house. The dark-haired boy shut the door behind him, and the 2 of them led her to the couch, where they gently forced her to sit down. They sat beside her on the couch and wrapped their arms tightly around her trembling frame to hold her flush against them. Tears continued to roll down her cheeks as she felt them press their faces into her shoulders, and she lifted her hands slowly to her hands slowly to place her hands on the back of their heads. The bells on the collars she wore as bracelets chimed quietly as each boy lifted a hand to remove them from her wrists, and she allowed them to do so. Each boy unwrapped their arms from around her for a moment, just long enough, and her eyes locked with those of the dark-haired boy. Tears rolled slowly down her cheeks as she stared into the icy blue eyes of the boy sitting next to her, and she hesitantly shifted her hand so she could cup the side of his face. Cubby. The name left her mouth before she even had the chance to realize that it was on her lips, and her watering eyes widened upon seeing the boy nod gently in response to her question. In a flash, she turned her head to the other side to lock eyes with the violet-eyed boy. Kit. Again, the name left before she even realized it was there, and again, the person she was speaking to nodded in response to her question. In the blink of an eye, she was holding their heads securely against their chest. She peppered their foreheads with kisses and sobbed quietly as the unbridled joy of being able to see her beloved cats again after so many years sank into her tired mind. Through her tears of joy, she never came to notice that they had begun to cry as well. Nor did she notice the way they snaked their hands into the pocket of her sweatshirt she wore. Despite their human appearances, they were still the kitten she had adopted all those years ago. They held every memory of the life they had every memory of what the life had been like with her. They remembered how secure they felt in the pockets of her sweatshirt or sitting atop her shoulders. So being with her as the way they were gave them a greater sense of joy than they had known in their previous existence, because now, whenever she held them, they could hold her back. The trio sat there on that couch in the house, sobbing in one another's embrace for what felt like an eternity. By the time they'd calmed down enough to separate enough to look at her, without crying, their eyes were swollen and puffy, and their cheeks were pink. Upon parting, the woman placed loving kisses to the foreheads of her boys, and she smiled at them happily. Kit, Cubby, welcome home, she said happily as she pulled him into a tight hug, and she rested her chin atop theirs as she hummed steadily, sweetly in response to having her beloved kittens secure in her arms once again. We're home, Mother, Kit and Cubby said gently in unison as they wrapped their arms around their mother's frame to embrace her lovingly. After that, the three spent many years together happily. They rarely knew a day of sorrow, and they took solace in the presence of one another. Nothing could separate them, not even the disturbing call of death. The three remained beside each other well into their aged years, and they passed on together in their sleep in a loving embrace. Then, even after they passed, they remained together in the fields of heaven. The end. Alright. So I did mess up often enough in the story trying to read it, but still a little nervous. I think I did okay. Do you? Oh, and before I forget, I better apologize to Sean. I didn't mean to call you an amazing little guy in that last video. I was nervous. I was trying not to cry. But you're not a little guy. You're taller than me. You're all taller than me. I'm tiny. I'm fun size. Alright, so made that little video for you. I hope you like it. I hope I didn't sound too bad or mess up the story too much as I read it. And I'll do more of these later.